I genuinely believe that management education gives you opportunity to change people around you. I mean, no other profession gives you that kind of opportunity. So obviously, I mean, it's fine. You make your money, you get recognized, but I think your ability to contribute to people around you, is so to me important, and that gives a satisfaction. So I would say somewhere this whole idea that obviously you should do well in your profession, but make sure somewhere you're able to contribute to society.
Hello, listeners. How are you all doing? Welcome back to the next episode. I have the privilege to host Professor Jarraj Shah, who is the director at Indian Institute of Management, Udaipur, who has been kind enough to grace the show today. A 30-plus year veteran in the academic space, we discussed a lot during this conversation. Topics ranging from the power and clarity of vision in building a challenger brand. Where is management education headed in a post-pandemic world? Lessons that Professor Shah learned during his interactions and association with the industry leaders, and what does a demographic advantage mean to India, and the challenges if not addressed. Join me on this episode as I chat up with Professor Shah. The city of Udaipur was always famous for its palaces and beautiful lake, and somewhere there somebody made to kind of make a difference, make add some more to the landscape of the city of Udaipur in the form of the beautiful Indian Institute of Management, Udaipur. With me today is the director of IMU, Professor Shah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Shrikant, for inviting me.
My pleasure. Like I mentioned, I think the city of Udaipur has definitely jotted with a new landmark in the form of IMU. And congratulations on what you have accomplished in a short period of time, Professor.
Thank you, Shrikant. And I must say that the fact that we were in a city, Udaipur, helped. It's a beautiful city. So to attract people, attract visitors, it did make a difference. But you're right, it's a proud moment for us. We complete our decade, but it's been a great journey.
Wonderful. So a decade of inception, IMU, and like organization building, nation building, institution building is also not a mean task. Walk us through the process of how you went about building this prestigious institute. In the corporate parlance, we call this as the challenger brand, right? You already had bunch of very well established IIMs, and you kind of came in as the new kid on the block and been 10 years in that journey.
You're absolutely right. We started in 2011, and by that time, we were 13th IIM, and we had at least 7, 8 very good private sector schools also, right? So almost like 20 great schools. You come in, and Ahmedabad and Calcutta started almost 60 years back. So, they had a history. So obviously, we knew we were entering a crowded space because if you look at number of management schools in India, closer to 3,000 schools, but 20 schools which were very good. So, we said, what can we do differently? As you rightly said, because we were a challenger brand, I mean, 13th IIM, right? I think it took 5 years for people to keep asking that question. Oh, is there a IIM in Udaipur? So I think, but we had a huge advantage that we could learn from the existing IIMs, right? So, for example, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Calcutta had done very well. So we could say, let's learn from that. But in parallel, there were a lot of things happening around the globe. So, for example, Harvard Business School had completed 100 years by 2008. And as a part of it, Professor Shrikant Datar and several others had put together a book in terms of, what would new MBA look like. So we had that advantage of Shrikant Datar's study. And there was another thing which was happening is there were a lot of interesting schools in neighborhood. So, for example, in Hong Kong, we had Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, whole lot of institutions in this part of world which had done well. And we said, can we learn from them? And for example, both HKUST and SMU had established its presence in 25 years. Similarly, we had ISB within India. So we asked ourselves, what can we learn from all this? And what do we do differently? And we also used a framework, from a management guru, C.K. Prahlad. He has a strategic intent where he essentially talks about this issue that if you're a challenger brand, what do you do? So essentially, we have just followed what he prescribes. So he said identify loose bricks, which essentially says that there are areas where existing leaders are weak. And see, can you start with that in the build layered advantage? So we identified initially, again looking at what Singapore others had done, identified two areas where if we focus in initial years, we could make a difference. So one was research focus. So traditionally, this is true in all institutions, whether it's IITs, IIMs, So for example, if you look at a top 100 institution in the world, we don't figure in, not just management, but institution in general. So the key was we had not focused on high quality research. And that was a true for top IIMs also. Second, we found that because we had a huge pool of students, by and large students had most institutions had not worried about international, that how are you ranked internationally. So apart from ABC and ISB, others had not bothered about to be in international ranking. So we identified this two as a two, what CK Prahlad would call loose bricks. So we put all our resources in research and similarly said, how do we get an international recognition? So we worked on a ASSB, which is one of the toughest accreditation, and similarly we focused on a research, high quality research. So for example, there's a UT Dallas database which looks at a publication in top 24 journals by all schools. That's a public database available. Now today, because we had focused on high quality journals, we are able to establish a very strong presence from a research perspective. So today we are already top 4 in the country as far as a high quality research is concerned. Now, because we had focused ourselves, we could actually build whole ecosystem on the research. And from beginning, we had said we're going to work with a very long term focus. So we had kept 20-year horizon and a focus. Because we had a long term focus, we didn't bother too much about what kind of performance we delivered in a short run. And I think what we did was everything around was built around these two principles, saying, can we be known as a research focus? Can we get international accreditation? And for that, make sure our education is well structured, there are processes in place. So, both on a research and education, we could focus using these ideas. So, just to give you an example, on a research, we don't believe in quantity, we only believe in quality. So, our expectation is we don't expect more than 3 papers in 10 years. So, we essentially hire young faculty, promising faculty, and we invest heavily. And with a result, we've got a best research ecosystem in the country. Same way, we put together all the ingredients in terms of processes, the way we do education, which allowed us to get ASSB accreditation, which allowed us to get into a FT ranking. So for our 2-year MBA, Masters in Management ranking is the most relevant ranking globally. In that ranking, we are youngest in the world in that ranking. So there are 5 Indian institutions, we being one of them, but we are youngest there. So I think it's essentially a sharp focus and a long term horizon, but focus on areas where there were loose bricks. And then saying, keep on building layered advantages. So we first focused on the research and student transformation. Now, next decade, we're going to focus on a building strong linkage with the industry. So I think a focused approach with a long term horizon is what made the difference.
Wonderful. Looks like there was definitely a method around which you wanted to build this wonderful institution. And that, as you had highlighted, focus on loose bricks, build upon that, have a long term focus. I think where you really set out from the other institutions was having that long term focus. You mentioned about 20-year-old kind of a 20-year long strategy.
So I must say here, we had a great advantage that board believed in us. With the board, we said, look, we are not here for a short run. So don't look at our performance in 3 years, 5 years. And we said, first time you should look at us is 2020. So I must say we had a great board which allowed us to do this. Of course, we had an advantage of being IIM brand, even though 13th IIM, but still the IIM brand was there. So we could also take advantage of alumni of all other IIMs. And in general, I must say all the institutions have been very supportive. We could reach out to everybody, and though we compete, we also work in a collaborative way. So we, by and large, we will share everything we have to every other institution. So that way we have a nice culture of collaboration, even though we compete.
Now, that's an interesting point, right? Somebody starting new, you have the constant pressure of proving that why somebody needs to invest in this kind of a brand, this in this kind of a school, and to kind of bargain a 10-year window to say that give us 10 years, we'll deliver something. How did you go about convincing the board saying that this is what is needed?
So I think that's where we collected a lot of data. So for example, if you look at top 10 institutions in the world, right? The youngest is 125-year-old institution. So first saying that we are very different from the corporate world. I mean, in a corporate world, we keep talking about this top 10 in 2020 is very different from top 10 in 2010. If you look at
Right.
2020 today, 20 years back, half of them didn't exist practically, right? But that's not true in academic world. In academic world, is that the youngest in top 10 is 125-year-old. Second, we also looked at top 100 institutions, and we found there were four institutions which were less than 50. And interestingly, all four of them were in this part of world, were essentially Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan. And we took their case studies. And I said, what did they do? I think that made the difference because we were talking with data, right? We were saying, here is the data, this is the way education industry works. It's not a short-term focus. Once we put that in place, and then we identified what are the loose bricks, and this is where we want to focus. But at the end of it, we had outstanding board. For example, people like Rajiv Bajaj. He kept asking a very simple question. He kept saying, "What does IIM Udaipur stand for?" He says, "The day you answer that question, we know you're going to be successful." So I think similarly, we had a whole lot of people who asked interesting questions, and to me that's very important that people asking you interesting question so that you similarly I was asked that give us a path in terms of how 10 years you're going to be self-sufficient because we had the advantage the government said first 8 years we'll support you but then you become a self-sufficient. So they wanted to see a path that how are you going to show that in 8 years you're going to be self-sufficient. So I think they kept asking the right questions. They were open to data, learning from all others. We also did one more thing. We created academic advisory board, where we got one of the best people from academic. It was Jahar Saha, who was ex-IMA director. It was M.R. Rao, who was ISB dean, who was earlier IIM Bangalore director. So when we got those set of people, right, we will vet our academic ideas through them and then bring it to board. Now, when you have such powerful set of people who vet your ideas, board would say, I think, I'm sure if you've been able to convince to this people, you're making sense. So, for example, we said, can we put 20% of our income into faculty development? I mean, it's a huge amount, right? But I said, look, if you want to crack this research piece, you got to invest heavily in research. And with our result today, in terms of attracting faculty, we are in top three in the India. You go and ask any doctoral student, where would you like your career to? At early stage, we are one of the best in the country. That's because we invest heavily in individual. And to some extent, we are a simple business. Our faculty should do well and our students should do well. That's the only way we are recognized, right? So we have a perfect alignment. There's no misalignment. For faculty, we say, make sure you become known researcher in your field. Student, you must do well in your career. And we're going to invest in that. So actually, we're a simple business.
No complications.
No complication. Let your faculty do well, let your student do well, and reflect on their glory.
Super. Now you have built that wonderful foundation in form of IMU. And now after 1 decade of its existence, the world forces have kind of gone helter-skelter, right? Post-pandemic, lot of, and the VUCA world. How do you see the management education world in the coming years?
So it's a very interesting question because my board asked me, several faculty colleagues asked us, and everybody in education around the world. Because here was the advantage that everybody, whether it's a Harvard, Stanford, everybody had a same problem. At the end of it, I think what is emerges following. So if you look at tier one, tier two, and tier three in any field, in management we have a tier one institution, tier two. What we're realizing in a tier one, the campus based education will continue to remain a key part, the face to face, but use technology in a meaningful way. So we are in a probably that luxurious space. If you're in a tier one, it's not going to change phenomenally. You must take advantage of the technology, and I'll come to that in a minute. But what's going to change dramatically is for a tier 2 and 3. Because earlier, we kept saying that the reason why tier 2 and tier 3 institution don't do too well is essentially not a great faculty, right? Now, suddenly, we're saying using a technology, using MOOCs and several others, actually, you might be able to get one of the best faculty in the world or in India to tier 2 and 3 institution. So I think the tier 2 and 3, it's going to change dramatically. And if you're a smart institution there, you'll change the nature of faculty. You will not choose a faculty on a content. You will choose a faculty who would say, okay, we're getting content from this best people in the world. I want you to do more a process part of it. So you want a more a facilitator rather than content expert. So suddenly you could have Google coming in, you could have somebody of that kind coming in, giving a game technology platform with the content coming from best in the world, and then facilitators. So I see the tier 2 and 3 have a great opportunity, and actually it can become a level playing field in some sense for them. For a tier 1, several things. One, so for example, at least the way we look at it, right now what happens is I have let's say 60 students in my class. Now, depending on a subject, in accounting, there could be some groups who do very well, some do who don't do very well. Same thing in analytics, right? Now, currently, we by and large go with the same pace for everybody. Now, technology will allow us to actually pace it differently for different groups, right? So that's one advantage. Second, we're able to do things which, when students are not physically here, for example, when they go for a summer or before they join, we'll be able to do a whole lot of activities which we couldn't do earlier. And third, we're able to get more people from industry into our classroom. Earlier, it would have meant a travel, even though because Udaipur is a beautiful city, not many people are willing to come. But this idea that I can just get somebody from anywhere in the globe just for 15 minutes. So to me, all this will say how do we make our education experience still better, right? So we're going to see interesting. Another thing which is going to happen is somewhere we'll have to figure out a way of lifelong learning for our alumni, which is saying not just finish with a convocation, but figure it out a way of being in touch in their careers at different points in time. So I think it's going to be fairly interesting, but we are still in a luckier situation where it'll give us a time, right? It's not that suddenly you wake up and say tomorrow is so different. So we did manage this year by online classes, and we put in a huge effort. Both faculty and students put in a huge effort. We kept saying that students learning will be central, but once all this is over, we're going to go back to campus based learning, face to face, but use technology in a more effective way. But I see a lot more opportunities now for the schools which didn't have that kind of opportunities earlier.
So this has only forced lot more positive opportunities.
Absolutely. And I'm saying if I was a student, I would say this gives me a lot more opportunity than earlier. Earlier, say if I can only get into a premier school, I had the advantage. Now I think as an individual and as a school, I can do a whole lot of things differently.
And you made a very interesting point, which was about lifelong learning process. And lot of the listeners out here are working professionals in different structure of their own careers, different length of time in their careers, right? What would be your recommendation for executive, for leaders to stay relevant and focus on this, what is called as a lifelong learning process?
Couple of things have happened, and I must say some of this actually even before COVID. Okay, this whole advent of technology, right,
Mm-hmm.
had changed the fundamentally the careers. In terms of, I think those days are gone where anybody can say I can forecast clearly what would this career look like 5 years from now. Okay, with a result, I don't think anybody can say I've prepared for your life, and same is true for a executive, right? So this whole idea that I need to learn to learn. So to me, I think what we give much more to our students is ability to learn, ability to ask questions in a right way, provide frameworks. Now, finally, the way you interpret that framework will keep changing. But a lot of those frameworks will not go away. So to me, the key is how do you keep applying those frameworks in a different environment is a core learning which everybody should have. Second, I think the impact of technology. You look at top 10 companies in the world today. seven of them are technology firms, right? Now, it's a reality which is not going to change. So I think this whole idea that are you relevant for tomorrow is going to be function of how do you embrace this technology. It doesn't mean that I become suddenly expert in a blockchain. It doesn't mean I become expert in AI/ML. But how do I see in my business this AI/ML, blockchain, some of these technologies? How are they going to change the way I manage my business? Who are going to be my new competitors? Right? My new competitors are not going to be coming from the same field. As I said, for education, I can see Google as one of the biggest threat in the future. Healthcare, right? So the whole idea that how do I look at my business and how technology is going to create opportunities as well as threat. I mean, to understand technology from that perspective. We're not saying suddenly you should be able to code in Python, right? But if I'm leading a team, then I must know how to use that in a meaningful way. And second, today, because of online, I think this idea that somebody earlier would say, do I actually come out for a 1 year or do I have to choose either education or a career? I think somewhere we can manage both. We can design interesting programs where some parts they will come to campus, some part they will be online, and then take advantage of mentoring using a global network. So suddenly, a lot of new interesting models of learning will come for executives and leaders. But several things. One, you will have to embrace the technology. That there's no running away from it. The way true for as education, as for you, Shrikant, and for all of us. But don't get, go back to about 10 years back. I still remember when digital marketing came in. And companies like Liver and all, you would have a top leaders who say, I don't understand this. But the way they picked it up by pairing with the young people, right? They're saying, I don't need to understand the way technology they need to understand, but I need to understand what does it mean the way I manage my business. So I would say for everybody, this idea that I need to keep learning myself. Similarly, the way I look at my career, is a very interesting question because those days are gone where you can say that whatever I was to doing, 10 years I'm going to do same. And for that, there are interesting ways of looking at one's own career, which one should look at.
No, great. And you yourself have been a testimony to that, right? You were a professor all through, and now you have shifted to being an administrator. What has been your own single most learning in this transition, Professor?
As you rightly said, I think you must recognize your own strength and your own weaknesses. For example, I know I'm a terrible administrator. So I must make sure I have a good people around me and I must respect them. So the challenge for me is not that do I understand those administration issue very well. The challenge for me is how do I attract those people and show them that we have a very interesting journey and be part of that. So for example, one of the decisions we had made was that we are not going to involve faculty in administration, which is major departure from institution and country. Because this is what globally people do. They don't involve faculty in admission, for example. In my view, we waste a lot of faculty time in all that. Now, when you want to do this, you have to attract outstanding people. So first, that what I need to do as an academic was very different from what I do as a director. Second, learn from others. So I spent a lot of time talking to people for 6 months. And even today, the number of people I talk to, so any decision I do, I actually talk to at least 10 people. Because to me, I mean, even if you're convinced this is the way to go, I think if you have this outstanding people with whom you can reflect on those ideas, one, your ideas become sharper. You also realize there are certain things which are your own blind spots. All of us have blind spots, right? So, ability to ask questions to me is one of the most important. And listen, finally, if you're going to say only listen to people, only ask people, and you only look at what you want to look for, then obviously it's going to work. So, for example, one of the person I went to, he said, "Look, you're going to be a terrible administrator. Be careful about it." First, he said, "Don't take up this job." Okay. Then he said, "If you're going to take up, make sure you keep realizing that you're not a good administrator." And that's something I always kept in mind. Right? I don't ever make any decisions on my own. But at the same time, I think this idea that test out everything, with data and keep looking for evidence finally. But I would advise everybody that learn from others and keep talking from people smarter than you. Okay. There are smart people in the world, right? They don't have to be in your own industry. And the key is that, you have to listen and you have to communicate your dreams. See, then only people are willing to spend. When you communicate, this is what you want to do for a country, that there are so many young institutions are coming, we want to build a role model institution. When people see you want to do something different and something noble, you will find people, I mean, you have to go with humility. That, if you start by saying, I've figured out everything, then nobody's going to waste time with you. So, and at the end of it, a lot of you people in corporate are much better than us on this. At the end of it, you realize there are only few things which matter. One is just building a right culture and investing in people. I think as a leader, I find if you do those two things right, you have to believe in students, you have to motivate them, they're going to deliver. Same thing is with the faculty, right? So we talked about this great dream that we want to build this great institution and come be part of it. But finally, everywhere we looked at as a co-creation, saying you're a partner in this exercise. It's your institution. Finally, as alumni, you're going to be part of this institution. So somewhere, you know, communicating, vision and keep talking about it and get everybody on board. And again, every time, long term was a key part.
Wonderful. You remind me of the words from Peter Drucker, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Absolutely. So I'm a firm believer of that. That if you don't have a right culture, the strategy will take you somewhere. But the right culture, where people are excited to be part of it. There's a similar phrase by, Sumantra Ghoshal about smell of the place. If you create a nice smell of the place, then everything will work it out.
Wonderful. So, drawing on this, let me also ask you another related question, which is you did mention about having interacted with a lot of luminaries, academicians, people from the corporate sector as well, and a lot of your students have gone ahead and done wonderful things. Drawing from all of this, is there a consistent theme that you see, which is about, okay, what draws towards success and failure? Maybe top two success themes and top two failure themes.
So, one is ability to reflect. I find the successful people are able to reflect periodically. Even if things are going very well, they have a time for a reflection. And that's something I would advise everybody, that you have to keep learning and reflect. So, for example, the day you stop learning, I think I would say quit the job, okay? Because you're not doing justice to yourself as well as firm. So, importance of a learning, importance of a reflection, I would say humility. I find unfortunately success, right? So let me tell you the two people whom I really admired are one is Dr. V of Arvindai Hospital. Okay. Now he started Arvindai when he was 63. All his life he had worked in a government hospital. But when I met him, we interviewed him, he's no more, but we interviewed him. I was there for 2 days with him. At that stage in life, he had nothing negative to say about anybody. Okay. And he kept saying every 2 minutes he will get up from his chair. This is an 83-year-old person. He says, have you read this? And he'll give something to read to me. I was feeling a little ashamed that here's I'm an academic and here is somebody, right? I found, this idea that, I can do such amazing work and there's nothing negativity about everybody. And second person, this is Jaipur Foot. These are the people I've found, Mr. Mehta. You go and spend time with him. Your next 6 months are done, honestly. Because there's so much humility. There's so much idea that I want to contribute to society. And I found they had their fair share of failures. But, every failure is treated as an opportunity to change something. So I know I've not answered your question in the way you wanted, but there are people who made a deep impact on me in terms of this idea. I think that somewhere the greatest satisfaction you get when you serve a society, and to me, I think that's a advantage. The reason I think I'm in a management education profession is I think I genuinely believe that management education gives you opportunity to change people around you. I mean, no other profession gives you that kind of opportunity. So obviously, I mean, it's fine. You make your money, you get recognized, but I think your ability to contribute to people around you, is so to me important, and that gives a satisfaction. So I would say somewhere this whole idea that obviously you should do well in your profession, but make sure somewhere you're able to contribute to society. And I find when I look at all the successful people, I find they go beyond just their domain and make contribution to other areas and to especially the people around them. They make a huge difference.
I think trait of successful people is also taking care of the community around them. So that's something that I have seen in close quarters. Yeah, we dwelled upon quite a lot of topics from the foundations of a good management school to what's going to be in the VUCA world to success principles of successful people. And we also touched upon the fact that it's hard to kind of predict what the future is going to look like in the ever changing dynamic world that we live in today. But still, I want to put my neck out and ask you this particular question. Given the fact that after reading quite a lot of statistics, that India would be the youngest nation for at least the next decade or so, right? And all along, we have been used to the fact that China was called as the factory of the world and India was called as the back office of the world. Now, with the country being the youngest in terms of median age, and with lot of changes happening to the management world, to the organization infrastructure, what is your future outlook? What kind of template should India Inc. adopt for the changing times?
Tough question, but very important question. Even if you don't know very clearly, we must grapple with this issue because otherwise, this whole demographic dividend, which we keep talking about, being young country, can really become a really lead to social tensions, right? If you have young people without meaningful opportunities, so I think we have to answer this question. And the way I see, we are at a very interesting stage. And to me, somewhere, what's happened in pandemic and just before that has created a very interesting opportunities. So first, China, for all complex set of reasons, right? People are not globally trusting China. So we have this great opportunity that so far China was the most important part of their network, right? Supply chain network. We're saying here is an opportunity where India can, take that path. That's one. Second, I think we got to leverage our competence and our capability as well as demonstrated performance in back office. If you look at post pandemic, where all of us worked online, right? Suddenly, I think we should be able to question everything, that the percentage of work which can be done, virtually, that pie has increased significantly. And that's where India has a legitimate claim that this is something we were always good at. And even during all the difficult time, we have delivered. So I'm saying we must leverage that and say post pandemic, there are only very few things where you can't do it online, and we are there. Including, for example, I would say I also believe education. We should become a hub of education in this part of the world. So I'm saying every area. So we will have to do this exercise. So that's we increase the scope of services because that's where we are good at. Second, in a manufacturing, we say, look, you're looking for alternate supply chain, we are there. I know we'll have to put lot of thing we need to do to put our house in order. I mean, I work in a supply chain area, logistics, and there are a huge lot of bottlenecks there. But we need to quickly put our act together. We must identify because, as you rightly said, this is the single most priority as a nation. So, can we put our act together from a slightly longer term? Honestly, education and healthcare. You cannot have a young people, but we not skill them well. Also, investing in our education and healthcare. And again, to me, this whole use of technology, the way I talked about saying, you can't get so many teachers in a rural areas, you can't get teachers in a tier 2 cities, but using technology, can we relook at the way we do healthcare and do education? So pandemic has changed the way we could look at all this, right? And I'm saying use technology, use all this, but we need this intent that we have to solve this jobs problem, some from a short term perspective and some from a long perspective. I'm optimist, but I think somewhere we have to give this as a priority one. This is for everybody in the society, industry, education, government, somewhere. Is there a way we can forget a lot of our differences? I'm sure there are areas where we have differences. Can we rise above all that? Because there's a lifetime opportunity for a country, right? That if we don't seize it at this point in time, we're going to lose it. If we say we are not an alternate supply chain, Vietnam, Mexico, they will take that opportunity. Everybody wants that opportunity. If we say this is going to be number one priority, similarly in every industry, how much we can actually convert into saying we will do it virtually. Each this is a healthcare, this is an insurance, this is so every vertical we should do that. So I'm quite excited. It's just that we need to prioritize this, right? If we don't solve this problem, we are sitting on a huge bomb, social tensions and all.
Prioritize and seize the opportunity that is in front of you. Professor Shah, I will be amiss if I do not ask this particular question from an academician, which is, are there any reading recommendations for the listeners out here?
Yeah, so I think one thing as an academic I can always do is say, here are the books, right? But I would talk about a few top books which has inspired me and as well as several leaders I've talked to. So I'm not going to talk about in specific order, but 4 or 5 books if I had to say. One book at a personal level is, How to Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen Howard. I think he outlines the way you may want to look at your career and the way you want to look at life. And I would recommend this to everybody. The second book I would recommend is Built to Last by James Collins. I think we keep talking about the firms have a half-life much shorter these days, but there are firms which are built to last. And I think there are some enduring lessons there which are important part of it. I would also recommend one interesting book which is by Charles Fine called Clock Speed, because he identifies that different industries have a different clock speed. It's borrowing from biology. So I would recommend that for people to look at it. I would also recommend more on the philosophy side this book by Yuval Harari, a series of books. But I think it's important for somebody who's looking at life ahead to look at that. I mean, I can go on, but I would probably stop here. There have been a couple of interesting books on the digital, which I'm reading these days. There's a Sunil Gupta's book on driving digital strategy. Some of them are able to help you understand, look at a technology from a managerial perspective. So yeah, I would put together this as a list I would recommend everybody to go through.
So Professor Shah, we can still go on with quite a lot of topics that is outlined there. If I were to ask you, if there's a billboard message that Professor Shah has access to, which can have a quote, question, or a statement, what would that billboard message be?
I would just say be curious, keep learning, and keep reflecting. I would just suggest that to everybody. If you do that, finally you will succeed in life and you'll keep people happy around you.
I think before we sign off, this is called as Inspire Someone Today. And as Inspire Someone Today is all about creating ripples of inspiration around us, what would be Professor Shah's Inspire Someone Today message for all the listeners out there?
So I would say, as you rightly said, I think all of us in society have that role. So one is the first, believe in yourself first. I think this idea that, I can do it. So believe in yourself and take people around you with you, because nothing you can do alone, right? But you have to have self-belief, but take people along. And for that, you'll have to inspire them. You'll have to have a vision. So create your own vision and inspire everybody around.
Wonderful. Professor Shah, thank you so much for what you have been doing, creating and developing leaders of future India, and to your commitment to the education industry, education vocation out there. It's been a pleasure having a chat with you, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Sridhar. It was wonderful talking to you, and I really enjoyed. And I hope in the process we inspire more people. Thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode, and I would love to hear from you. There's an option to leave a voice message, and the link is embedded in the show notes. So go out there, share your views, and I eagerly look forward to hearing from you. Stay well, stay safe, and keep inspiring. Thank you for listening into today's edition of Inspire Someone Today. It's been a privilege to bring in these conversations. If you like this episode and have any feedback or comments, do mail me at inspiresomeonetodaypodcast@gmail.com. Inspiring someone is like creating ripples around us. If you like what to listen, feel free to share them and let's create ripples of inspiration. Do not forget to follow me on my Instagram handle @InspireSomeoneTodayPodcast for all the latest updates. This is Srikanth, your host, signing off, and until next time, keep inspiring.